Welcome to the Designated Drinker Show, the podcast that's raising the bar on craft cocktails. I am your host, Louise Sollison. With me, it's my very, very talented friend who can be as happy as a lark or crazy as a loon, the mixtress, DC Gina.
I will take the loon because that's the cutest bird of them all.
Be a little cray.
Yeah, that or a fluffy butt chicken. I'm not really sure.
A fluffy butt chicken.
Yeah, they have fluffy butts. It's like a thing.
I didn't know that.
They do. They're very soft.
I would assume so.
Yes. All right. Well, I'm done. Keep going.
Well, it is pop quiz time, Gina.
All right.
Okay, you got 4 clues.
Okay.
I'll give you 4 clues
I'm
to
ready.
guess this
I'm ready.
famous American icon. He stands 8'2".
Okay.
He has a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame.
Okay.
And he has some famous cousins from countries from all around the world. This is kind of funny. It's Albelardo is from Mexico. And I think it might be Pino or Pino is from the Netherlands.
Okay.
Pupas is from Portugal.
Okay.
And Garbaldo is from Brazil.
Okay.
And it takes 6,000 individual feathers to create his beautiful plumage.
So I get to guess?
Well, go ahead. Who you got?
So I went to University of Maryland, and as we all know, Jim Henson. I was going to say Henderson. Henson. Geez, my alma mater. Went there, so I know who this is. Big Bird.
It is Big Bird.
Because he's in our student union along with Kermit.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
I didn't know he had cousins from around the world, though.
I did not know that. That is a very new fact to me. But
And apparently they're different colors than Big Bird.
what? Yeah, I'm sure. But that we just happen to know all of that about the Muppets and all that stuff. And he invented Kermit the Frog when he went to school there.
Yep, that's awesome. That's cool.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah.
So, just so you know,
You feel smart right now. I always fail these quizzes, and I finally got one right.
I think you're going to get a lot smarter on this episode because this little pop quiz was inspired by today's designated drinker. Please welcome to the show someone who can school us on all things birds. He is an assistant professor of wildlife ecology of Oregon State University. He is Jim Rivers. Welcome to the show, Jim.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here.
Are you ready to get us all smart?
I am ready.
So what drew you into academia?
What drew me into academia? Well, it started with, I think, just a general interest in nature, in wildlife, and how the world works. And I found that through my studies, working in wildlife biology was an area that allowed me to just ask basic questions about how the world works, and in particular, how animals interact with their environments. And when I was an undergraduate, I started my university degree path in engineering, and that turned out to be a terrible fit for me. Didn't do very well, and ended up switching majors to wildlife ecology, and really kind of blossomed as a student and realized it was my passion. And at that point, wanted to go on to graduate school, and then I thought being a university professor would be really fun because I'd be able to never really grow up or get a real job and teach students and do research, and here I am.
That's awesome. So I think you told me when we were speaking before that basically birds were your thing from the time you were really young.
Yeah, I wish I knew how I initially got started. My mother always gives credit to having me by the window when I was she said it was a 2-month-old baby in her hands that was watching the bird feeders, which I don't think any one thinks that actually could have happened. But as a kid, I was encouraged to be outside and to explore. I grew up in a state park in Massachusetts.
Wow.
Which sounds a lot more glamorous than it was. It was really a beach that was overrun in the summertime when it was hot, but in the off season, in the fall and spring and winter, it was basically an opportunity for me to run around and watch birds and look at animals. And it really was something that took off when I was young. And I was the odd kid who was telling his grandparents what the warblers they were seeing in their backyard was when I was 9 or 10. So
that's awesome. That's cute. So your mom basically just opened the door and pushed you out.
Yeah. They'd call social services on that nowadays, but back then it was good parenting.
No, my mom had the rule. Didn't your mom? My mom, I wasn't allowed to come. I had to be home before the street lights come on. But if you made like guest appearances, like coming back to and from the house, my mother would say, if you come back in the door one more time, you're going to have to stay in, which then, of course, just made you stay out.
Well,
of course, it was in the 70s, though, 80s.
And then all those children went missing, and then they finally were like, maybe this is not the best kind of parenting. However, Jim, where like what you're saying, where you live, I live similarly. It's like in a similar area now in Maryland. Mm-hmm. So now I make my kids go outside all the time. I'm like, go outside and find something. And they'll be like, okay. And like we have like 2 acres or a little bit more, and they'll like come back with all this weird things. And they're like, Mom, did you know we have this blue and yellow bird that lives in the back of in the tree line? I'm like, no. And then we go and look for it. And truly, I've learned all about kinds of different birds that I didn't even know existed ever in plain sight. And now that I've seen them in Maryland, I realize they're in DC, but it just never occurred to me that I just thought everything was a finch. I'm like, that's a finch. And everyone's like, it's not a finch. I'm like, it looks like a finch. And they're like, it's just not. It's a hawk. And it's giant. I'm like, oh, it's not a giant finch? That's weird.
A raptorial finch.
Well, you never know in DC.
Well, that just goes to show you the power of observation. I'm putting together a course that's on terrestrial vertebrate ID. So we go out and we look for amphibians, reptiles, mammals, and birds. And it turns out that most of the time we just find birds. But the students in that class oftentimes start by saying exactly what you said, Gina. Everything is a finch or a robin. And then by the end of the course, they actually have the skills to sort those different species out and understand and actually observe and see that they're doing different things. And it's really fun because it's one of those courses where you can honestly tell the students you'll see the world differently at the end of this course. And they say, oh, you're just an overblown university professor. You say, no, really, when you walk outside from now on, you will see things differently. And I've had students come up to me at the end of a course and say, yeah, I see the world in a different way. I've got my field guide now and I can identify things. And it's one of those few moments in teaching where you can actually see that progress on a really short time frame. It's really exciting.
That's awesome. Maybe that's what you need to get the girls, like a beginner's like field guide to birds.
Excuse me. Do you realize I live with Neil Dundee, right? You think they don't have that, binoculars, and they're like out there and they know more about birds than I do. And they literally are like, they do this thing now to know if it's a hawk flying, if it has all the fingers just when it's flying, and they know it's a hawk versus a turkey vulture. So guess what Mommy says? You don't know what you're talking about. And I just drive the car. and then it's like, and it's nutty. But I have to say, birds are kind of amazing because they tell you more about like the weather and stuff, right? Like, Jim, is that true? Like, I live in a farming community now, and everyone's like, oh, all the birds are in the tree, it's gonna rain. Is that real?
I haven't heard that particular description of impending rain or precipitation from birds and trees, but it is true that if you think about birds, they've been evolving in their environments for hundreds of thousands, millions of years. And so when a storm is coming, they know a storm is coming. They sense a change in barometric pressure, just like a lot of our domestic animals know when there's an earthquake or there's something going on. You always hear about that. And in fact, some researchers have tried to use animals as early detection systems for earthquakes and things like that. So if you have a bird feeder at home in the wintertime and you know a storm's coming, you can see that the activity really bounces up. And then sometimes if it's going to be a long storm, the activity drops off and the birds have kind of gone off to a sheltered location. They've got their bellies full and they're just going to wait out the storm. So you can tell a lot by birds. You can even think about birds as being basically, they can tell us all about the environment. So that's one of the reasons why we study them, because we know that birds over the last 50 years or so, there's the numbers that's been put out is that we've lost about 3 billion birds.
Wow.
And so we know that a lot of that's due to habitat change. And we know that birds are really important, not just because they're fun to look at, but they do all kinds of different services for us. They eat insects and they provide a lot of benefits that humans ultimately get.
So cool.
I mean, cool and not so cool, right? I guess it's the canary.
No, I mean, it's like
the canary in the coal mine, exactly.
It's amazing that there's so much to be learned by something that we probably, to your point, Jim, we go through the world without even noticing they're there because they're always there. And to your point, you didn't realize those birds that you see out in the wild are really all around you all the time, just because we're just too busy to stop and Not smell the roses, but I don't know, look at the birds.
All right, Jim, here's my question. Are you ready?
Yep, I'm ready.
Why are we supposed to not feed the birds in Maryland right now? What is happening?
That's an open question. And there has been a mysterious disease that birds are getting. I don't know a lot about it because it's not happening on the West Coast here in Oregon. We've only heard about it from our colleagues. And the thought is that by putting out feeders, you're concentrating individuals, and you may be helping that, whatever that disease is, to spread more rapidly. So that's one of the things that's come up. I think one of the hypotheses that I heard was it was related to the brood of cicadas, the 17-year brood 10 of cicadas that came up this year, that there may have been some sort of fungal pathogen or pesticide, but I think that's been discounted. And we don't really know. So that's one of the things about bird research, is that we know birds really well, probably better than any other vertebrate, but there's lots of things that just crop up, and ornithologists are scratching their heads saying, we're not sure what this is, and we need to spend more time looking at it.
My birds are not happy. They keep coming to my bird feeder because we have like a bunch of them around the house, and they're like, hey lady, we know you two, where's the food? And we're like, we can't feed you because we don't want any, we don't want to be the cause of spreading anything. And it's crazy though, because now I miss them, because they literally come on the side of the house and you see all these different birds, and then they have eggs, and we have chickens on our property. We have chickens now, and I didn't realize that birds in nature have clutches. They lay lots of eggs, and a chicken lays an egg, and then you have ducks, and they can lay a clutch or an egg. It's things are crazy. And I'm I don't know, I admire what you do, because I can't believe there's so much with this. It's a whole science, but I don't mean that. I mean
There's a whole
I live
science,
it every
that's right.
day, and I don't realize what I'm living. Do you know what I mean? I can't explain it. You could really separate it from the science of it and be I get eggs from this bird and that's it. But those birds have personalities. Mm-hmm. They have to have some sort of memory.
They do. In fact, I don't know if you mentioned chickadees, but chickadees are one of the species that often come to bird feeders, and you'll see them. They come, they take a single sunflower seed, if that's what you have in your feeder, and they leave. And if you watch them, sometimes they go and they sit on a branch, and they'll peck open that seed and they'll get the meat out of it. Other times they'll take that seed and they'll hide it somewhere. So they're in the group of birds that we call food caching birds. So jays do this. A lot of members of the chickadee family does this as well. And it's thought to be a buffer against environmental variability. So if you don't know what the weather is going to be like all winter long, because you're a small bird and you can't predict it, what you can do is basically have your own bird feeders that you put out in the environment and hide it, because you don't know if that bird feeder is going to be there in the future, but you have control over those individual seeds. So it's an interesting behavior. Birds do it to different degrees as species. And as you mentioned, there's personalities. And so birds do things to different degrees. There's some really bold birds. And in fact, this is one thing that I observed as a kid at bird feeders, is that you could stand out by a bird feeder with seeds in your hand. And every now and then one chickadee would land on your hand and take a seed from you, but not all of them. Some of them would just say, no, I'm going to pass on that. That kid looks like he's going to eat me. And the other ones would say, I'm rolling the dice on this. I'm going to go down and get a seed. So there are very different, we call them personalities, or some researchers call them coping styles, because they're tied in with behavior, and they're also tied in with physiology as well. And when you look at birds, you say, all robins are the same in that flock. But you wouldn't say that about a group of humans at a concert. You'd say, wow, look at all the diversity that we see. So there's quite a bit out there. It's just something that isn't really something that we see at first glance with a lot of these species.
So there's a book, right? There's a book that we bought that says it's called Chicken Speak.
Yeah.
Because we want to know the chickens, the clucking. They make a lot of sounds, but they make the same sounds a lot. And when my husband comes, they coo at him. They make this this very nice rolling coo. I can't describe it. He also feeds them mealworms you have no idea. He just takes them out of his pockets and throws it. He must be the emperor of their worlds. And then I show up, and I'm the person that's I help clean it out, and I make sure it's clean. I'm constantly cleaning, and they have a very different sound for me. It's almost like this. It's I can't describe it. It's like a rolling sound, right? So like they say in this book, Chicken Speak, it says that this sound is like a sound of love, or expression of like part of the group.
Yeah.
Whereas I am not. They are not happy with me, like, because I'm constantly touching their stuff.
Yeah.
So like for me, they're like, oh, like I'm almost invasive, and like they'll like, because I'm always disturbing their nesting material and cleaning and making sure that they have a good environment. But when my husband's always like, here's some watermelon and here's some mealworms, and they're like, and they make this, it's a crazy noise. I mean, if you. Is that true of all birds? I guess my question is, one, is that real? Is that a real thing? Or did we buy this book and now we're brainwashed and we think that's true? And the birds actually hate us.
It sounds like you've experienced it, so it sounds like it's real in that sense. I could see that. So let me just start off with chickens and remind you and your listeners that chickens are a highly domesticated species. So when you talk about chickens, you talk about wild birds, they're very different, but they do share some commonalities. And one of those things is that they have different vocalizations, as you said. And these vocalizations may be to a song to woo a female, or a song to repel a rival male. And they have different contexts in which they use them. So I could see that a chicken over time would learn that your husband was the fun parent and coming in with the candy and all the good stuff that they don't get very often. And then you might be seen as not as fun, coming in and kind of hiding up behind the chickens. So I wouldn't be surprised if that was the case, but I wouldn't necessarily ascribe it to love, because that goes to a whole other realm in terms of kind of animal behavior and interpreting what they're doing. But I suspect that they are and they may be communicating with each other more than they're communicating with you or your husband. They may be just saying, okay, hey, we're getting some food. And those coos are more of a call that would be to bring in other members of the flock for the food, as opposed to saying, hey, thanks for bringing the food.
I think I'm going to tell my husband, I'm like, I told you they don't love you. and Jim Rivers said it. They're just like, hey, that guy's here with food.
I guess your back
exactly.
sheet. If you need that, go for it. Yeah.
But
with you, they're like, there's an intruder.
all right, so here's my last crazy bird question.
Keep them coming. These aren't crazy by some of the ones I get, just so you know.
So again, we live in a little bit of a rural place in Maryland, and we had the feeders out. We're not feeding the birds right now, but we have definitely like robins that come together always to the feeder. Do they mate for life?
Most birds that are small, like robins and other birds that would visit your feeders, don't last that long. And so they may be paired for as long as they live, but they don't have a bond that holds from one season to the next. And we know that because we have lots of studies of birds that are nesting, and we go out and we capture those birds and we put on bands that only those birds have. They're unique color combinations, and we see them pairing up with different individuals from year to year. There are some birds that have what we call long-term pair bonds, which essentially is to say that they mate for life, where they stay together. But what we know is that if one of those individuals dies, the other one doesn't die of heartbreak. It actually goes out and finds a mate and initiates a nest and breeds afterwards. So it's I think it's a little bit of legend, I guess, that most birds mate for life. Most of them are in fact, some of the studies that have emerged in the last 20, 30 years have shown that males and females are kind of waging this quiet war with each other. And a lot of these birds, like robins, the female will actually mate with other males that she's not rearing the chicks with. So she'll sneak off and have what we call an extra pair copulation, which is to say a tryst with a neighbor. And in some ways that is a benefit to her, because she gets to have different genetic material in her offspring, in that so that they may match better to the environment. And males are basically doing the same thing. Once the female is on the eggs, sometimes the males sneak off and do the same thing. We used to think that it was just kind of harmony and males and females were there together. And back in the 1990s, there was some genetic paternity analysis, and people kind of dropped their jaw and said, wait a minute, these birds are not doing what we thought. It's not harmony. They're actually kind of out for themselves. So that kind of goes in the face of this idea of harmony and mating for life and always being there for each other. It's a dog eat dog world, or maybe Robin eat Robin world.
That's crazy. First of all, now everything I believe is wrong. Next, now I have one more question. So what's the average lifespan of these little birds, like a robin or the birds you see in your backyard birds?
Yeah, so it varies on the species. It varies depending whether a bird might be a migrant. It goes all the way to South America and back, or whether it hangs out in your backyard all winter like a chickadee might. Probably just a couple of years, or perhaps even less than that. It depends on how old the bird is, because we know that when birds leave the nest, it's a real bottleneck. And so a lot of the birds that leave or fledge from the nest don't actually make it to the point where they survive all the way to the breeding season. But once you survive to one breeding season, you have a decent opportunity to survive to the next. And there are some birds that may live 3, 4, 5, 6 years. There's always one bird in a study that comes back year after year, and someone tallies out how many young it may have had or how many miles it flew in migration. But those are usually the exceptions. Most birds, it's a pretty short lifespan that they have.
All right, I have another question.
Keep going. I'm sitting over here.
So if you're not allowed to, right now, we're not allowed to feed the birds, right? And like, say you want to, like butterflies, right? I don't know why I'm putting this together, but I just have it in my mind. You plant butterfly gardens and you're like, okay, I'm going to plant this butterfly garden and butterflies are going to come. And it's honestly, it really is true. They come. So if you're not allowed to feed the birds bird seed anymore, just say it becomes like a real thing. Other than berries, because I know berries are real because birds will eat that and they eat my figs constantly. What else can you plant that would entice birds to naturally come by your house?
So many of us, when we feed birds, go out and buy a big 25-pound bag of sunflower seed. You can plant sunflowers. That's something that is a natural plant, or at least what you'd buy in the stores, a derivative of a natural plant. In fact, my neighbors have these really large sunflower seeds, and I say large, I measured one. It was about 14 feet tall, this individual plant. And I don't know where they got them. They're ginormous. And what I wanted to do last summer was to collect some of the seed heads so that I could grow some in our garden, but I didn't get to them in time. All the birds came in and ate all those seeds right off the top of the sunflowers. So that's one that you can plant. Birds during the summer, when they're nesting, most birds are eating small insects. And that's why bird feeding in the summer doesn't really work out that well. There's some birds like goldfinches and house finches that come in because they eat seeds and they also feed those seeds to their offspring. But by and large, chickadees and nuthatches and woodpeckers are out looking for really juicy insects that they can feed to their offspring that they can grow really, really fast with. So in a sense, the birds have food that are in your backyard. So you may be feeling guilt about not putting your feeders out, but those birds are able to make it. And in fact, we have a paper that was recently published that looked at bird feeding, and we challenged the birds in this study by clipping some of their wing feathers. And what we found was that the birds didn't depend on the bird feeders like we thought they would. We thought once we made it a little bit harder for them to fly and they had to use a little bit more energy, that they'd be on the feeders all the time. And in fact, it was the opposite. They actually avoided the feeders for about a week to 10 days, and then they slowly came back. And what that suggested was that they had plenty of food in the environment around them. So if you're not feeding the birds this winter, that's okay. The birds will get by. And again, if you step back and think about a chickadee and how long it's been in this setting where it's had to get food on its own before humans came along and started putting out feeders, those birds are well evolved to figure out where the food is and to survive the winters. Even when it's cold and, on a 0-degree night, you say, how do these birds survive? Well, they can do it. They're amazing.
So I think what he's saying is that they don't need us.
I know.
Yeah, we're not as important as we'd like to think we are when it comes to bird
So my
feeding.
chickens need to live in a house then? I feel like they do. I mean, I wallpapered the coop. You can look at my Instagram and be like, this girl's a nut. I wallpapered my chicken coop. I was like, do you think they're like a light shade of green? It does look like a pasture. Oh my God.
Can birds see color?
Birds can see color, and they can see it better than us. We have 3 cones in our eyes, which help us see different shades along the light spectrum. Birds have a 4th cone, and so they can see in the UV. So what you and I would look at and see on a particular bird might look very different. And in fact, there's been experiments looking at how birds interact, and a lot of the plumage, a lot of feathers on their head and on their face look different under UV light than what we see. And so those are ways birds signal to each other. They often use vocalizations and they use movements of their bodies, but just their feathers alone can tell each species and each individual a lot about others.
So the green color was a good choice, right? All right. I see it now. I'm going to make a cocktail now because I can't believe it.
He validated you right on one thing.
So far, the crazy chicken lady, she picked the right color. All right, I'm going to make a drink.
Make a drink.
And I feel like it's inspired. It's inspired by Jim, by you being on the show and backyard culture of what is going on in my backyard. Because I can't even believe that I have blackberry bushes, and it might as well have not had any blackberry bushes because I got 0 blackberries because the birds got all the blackberries. So I actually had to go to the farmer's market and get these blackberries, which are beautiful,
Oh, nice.
So that I could actually make you a drink. And I know that the birds ate all the blackberries because my car was 100% an indication that they had eaten the blackberries, flown around specifically my car.
Yes.
And pooped all over it. So there we go. All right. So a little birdie told me that you like daiquiris, and so do I, but a really great daiquiri, and it's really fun and easy to do. And a variation is just to add a little bit of berry to it. And we're going to just make a traditional daiquiri. We're going to do a little simple syrup and rum, and we're going to add blackberries. So really, really simple. What you're going to do is, depending on the size, these are very large blackberries. If you're making one drink, we're going to make 2. We're going to use about 4 to 5 blackberries, and we're just going to hand squeeze them in. And you can muddle them as well. I just find that when they're this juicy, it's really great to just put them inside of your hand squeezer, throw them in, and then dump them into the shaker tin.
That's fun. I've never done that.
Yeah, it's just it's fun. It's an easier way. I like to use one tool because I realize I make drinks at home that I'm the one that has to clean it up. And I'm like, hey, can you clean up my station? Because my station is a disaster. So it's just me. So I'm like, hey, can you clean? Oh, it's just you. Okay, good.
Yeah.
And I'm usually making drinks for everybody.
And she's now wallpapering the chicken coop.
Yeah, apparently now I'll be making cocktails for my chickens. I'm like, oh, did you love him more? No. I'm like, they don't love anybody. I'll make them an elixir. Anyway, so we're going to add to that as we're making a daiquiri. So we're going to do 1 ounce of lime juice. So these are fairly large limes today. So we are going to use the juice of 1.5 limes.
We all know fresh is best.
Yeah, it is. So just a side note, when you're using fresh berries in a daiquiri, 100%, it makes it more bitter. And I know that sounds a little crazy to say, because why would blackberries and lime juice do that? But blackberries by nature are not that sweet. You have to add sugar to make them really sweet. Anyway, so we have our lime juice in there, the blackberries. Now we need the good stuff, the rum, right? So we're going to use a little Don Q white rum, and we're going to use 2 ounces. And I like to always do like 2 ounces and a quarter because it gives you the forgiveness for if you make it a little too sugary with your simple syrup. And then we're going to use 1/2 ounce of simple syrup. So we're making 2 drinks. I'm pouring 1 ounce in here. And that is it. Now I'm going to put some ice in here. And we're going to shake and strain. I was going to say we should call this drink bird droppings, but that's probably not a good idea. I was just thinking about my car. I'm like, it's so annoying. Let me shake this up.
Such a great sound.
It is a great sound. It's very shushy today.
Shushy, shushy.
I know.
Another pro word.
What shows? Yeah, shushy. I know. I'm really nailing that. I'm an expert at cocktails, right? So we're gonna still get color. It's so beautiful.
It is really pretty.
I love blackberries. They really lend themselves. They can be violet. They can be red. They're beautiful to use in drinks. And you can also double strain this if you want to. Generally, a daiquiri doesn't need a garnish. If you're feeling so inclined, you could put a little lime wheel on it. Really up to you. It doesn't technically need it, but
It's prettier
it's
with.
pretty. So I wouldn't suggest trying to put a blackberry inside your glass because you will ruin your clothes. Okay. So that is it. So cheers. I am sorry that you cannot imbibe right now, but hopefully I will make this at home, Jim. Cheers.
I'm going to stop on the way home today and get some ingredients so that I can try this myself. So Gina, I have a question for you.
Yes.
Are there any cocktails that use eggs? Speaking of birds.
Of course. It's funny you should ask that question, Jim.
I don't know. I can't think of any offhand.
So a Pisco Sour is the number one. A whiskey, any sour drink usually has an egg white in it. In the wintertime, you could do like whole egg drinks that you do with like beer, whole egg, and you heat them up. And they're like really like delicious, like a custardy kind of drink. Then you have like this whole realm of like eggnogs and coquitos,
Sure.
right, that use eggs.
Yeah. Okay.
What's interesting now, speaking of eggs, I can't believe I didn't make an egg cocktail. Duh. So annoying. I'm so annoyed with myself right now. I should have made an egg cocktail.
I shouldn't have asked.
What's interesting enough is that people are starting to use different kinds of eggs in their drinks, like for different like textures, such as like duck eggs, quail eggs, which are kind of feel like are really not really, they don't have much of anything to them.
It seems like it would take an awful lot of eggs.
Well, no, because you can take quail eggs. Here's a fun recipe, right? So you have quails and people raise them and you have like all these quail eggs. You're like, what do you do with it besides make a miniature bacon, egg, and cheese? You take your quail eggs, you really lightly poach them because you almost want to make them, because they become hard boiled very quickly. So you put them in boiling water, like, a couple of minutes, pull them out, let them cool, and then you crack the shell just a little bit. And then at the same time, you're making like some kind of tea, like lapsang tea or green tea or, your favorite like really herb tea. And you take the cracked egg shell and you soak it in the tea.
Oh.
And you pull them out and they make a great bar snack and you put a little bit of salt. So that's, it's a high-end bar snack. But honestly, at the end of the day, it's so easy to do and you can do it with a giant egg, but giant eggs to eat are a little bit weird. But go to your farmer's market, especially where you are, you have so many quail eggs come from your area. I feel like you get those in your farmer's market. They're not expensive. They'll be like $2 a dozen, and you can make this in like really fun thing to serve on the side of like martinis or drinks like that.
Oh, interesting. So when you soak the egg in the tea and because it's cracked, does the egg take on the color of the tea?
Not the egg shell, just the egg white will. Yeah. And then you'll obviously to peel and eat it, and then it'll have this little cracked coloring on it. It's really pretty.
Oh, that sounds delicious.
Yeah, it's a really fun thing to do. And then like eggs and martinis and caviar and anchovies and all that kind of stuff, and martinis have always gone hand in hand. So
yep,
just another way to do it. I cannot believe I didn't make you an egg drink. What was I thinking? That just flew right by me. No.
Well, Gina, I like that was bad. I like the blackberry though, because we have it's a very nasty, invasive, exotic blackberry here, but it has the most delectable berries and they are ripe right now. And I'm going to take my kids out and we're going to go get a whole bucket full of them and make some of these drinks because it is blackberry season in Western Oregon right now.
That's why your car is a mess.
Yeah. I also found there's another kind of berry that birds eat called Juneberries. I didn't realize this was a thing. There's a thing on the north and where I live. They're like teeny like red versions of blackberries. And I thought they were like a mulberry, and they're not. They're called Juneberries apparently. And I looked it up because I didn't believe everybody in my neighborhood. And like they're like Juneberries, so I looked it up. They're really bitter for humans to eat, but you can. But the birds go crazy for it, and they eat them all.
Yeah.
So I'm like, God.
Yeah, we have those near our house in Virginia. So
yeah.
Yep.
But you can't eat them. They're not mulberry. Well, you can eat them. They're just not
tasty.
But
yeah, apparently the birds would disagree, but
So in your free time, I have one last question, and then I will let you ask a question.
No.
So in your free time, do you actually, because this is what you do for work, do you like study the birds, like go bird watching and stuff like that in your free time?
So I like to get out and explore. I wouldn't call it birding per se. Sometimes I do go with friends, or if there's someone in town, a colleague from the East Coast who hasn't seen some of the birds that we have out here, we might go to the beach or go on a hike or something. But I've got a couple of young kids, so I also do research on bees, and bees are a lot easier for kids to see. So a lot of times when we go out, those are what the kids are able to see up close. They're able to catch them and look at them, and they've got containers that they can catch the bee in, and it's got a little magnifying glass on the cover, and so they can look in. So we do probably more bee watching than we do bird watching nowadays. But I still get out, and I do a lot of my birding by ear. So I don't necessarily look for birds, but I'm out listening and hearing the different calls and songs, and kind of know what's in the area just by sound.
Bees are another very interesting. Would you just follow anything that has yaw and pitch? You're like, okay, it's got yaw and pitch, and it's not navigated by a human. I'm gonna follow it around.
I usually introduce my research as bees and birds as opposed to birds and bees, because then
the birds and
the bees.
Yeah,
that's a whole nother class.
Here's my favorite thing about bees. Wait, I got one. Italian honeybees are my favorite bees. They're beautiful, and if you can get your I have friends that have hives. Oh my gosh, they produce the most beautiful honey, and they are actually, this is going to sound ridiculous what I'm going to say, they are very calm. They're not like some other honeybees are generally a little bit more like territorial.
Busy as a bee.
And they're just a nice bee. If you're gonna, at least what I've witnessed
they're nice
is if you're gonna keep bees, they're a nice bee to have. Is that, am I wrong?
Yeah.
Am I saying the wrong? Are they the worst bee? And I just happen to know some good Italian honeybees. I don't know. Is it because I'm Italian
You're
and
just
they're nice
biased.
to me?
You're biased because it's
They're
an
like,
Italian
she's
bee.
Italian too. Don't sting her.
They know. They can tell. No, there are different varieties of honeybees, and there are some that are a little bit more temperamental than others. So you're right. Some are preferred to work with. I'm not sure if where Italian bees fall on that spectrum, but again, it's kind of like the chicken and the bird thing. I study native bees. I don't study honeybees, so I don't know that much about them, to be honest with you.
Did
I know
you?
to stay away
So
from the
here's an
hives.
interesting thing. There's something going viral that you bring up bees and them being nice. I just did air quotes. It's a girl who saved this bee that was in the middle of the street. She thought it was going to get run over, so she ran out and picked up the bee and saved the bee. The bee has been with her, by her side, for the last couple of weeks. It's her social media thing, but it shows the bee sitting on her glasses. Everywhere she goes, the bee stays with her. She goes shopping, the bee goes with her, and he just sits on her glasses. I don't know. I'm making it a boy bee. I don't know, but yeah, it's a thing that's going about on the social medias. All those kids, on the social medias with their bee friends.
I would 100% not tell anybody to touch a bee.
I'm just wondering if I got to go check it out.
Can you touch bees? I mean,
Yeah.
do you handle bees?
Sure.
Yeah, so bees get a bad rap mostly because of wasps and yellow jackets, which are their cousins. But bees are basically a vegetarian wasp. They branched off millions of years ago, and they go after flower parts. They don't go after meat. So if you have a barbecue and you have some leftover steak or chicken or something, the things that land on that plate of steak are yellow jackets. And they come and they take little bites and they go back to their nest site. Bees don't do that. Bees won't bother you at a picnic. And so everyone kind of conflates wasps bad and then bees are bad because they can't tell them apart. They don't want to get close to tell them apart. But by and large, native bees are not large social groups. So we have a hive that may have 20 or 30,000 individual bees in it. Most bees are solitary nesting, which means it's a single female and she's doing it all by herself. She may have a hole in the ground, or she may have a little cavity like a mason bee, but it's just her, and she probably raises maybe 8 or 10 individual bees over the course of that season. She doesn't even really raise them. She lays an egg and then she dies, because usually the flight season is just a few weeks, and then those bees develop over time. And something like a mason bee you can pick up in your hand and you can look at, and if you pinch the bee, if the bee thinks it's going to be hurt, it's going to respond, it's going to sting you. But a lot of times you can just have a bee on your hand. And my kids are 5.5 and 3.5, and they go out and they handle mason bees, and they catch bumblebees are a little bit different because they are a social group. They have social groups. But most solitary bees, you could just put your hand right there and they'd crawl on your finger and they'd be fine.
Huh. See? They're just trying to keep them to their she's going to step on me. I got to sting her. Or she's going to smack me. He's just trying to protect himself. Guy's just trying to make his way through the world.
Yeah, because if you think about it, a solitary bee doesn't have all the sisters that a honeybee does. So if she gets whacked, then she doesn't have any opportunity to reproduce anymore. And that's why honeybees can sting, and then the colony continues because there's so many of them. So it gets into this very complex thing called haplodiploidy, which we don't have time for, but basically it works out that solitary bees are nicer in a sense, and you can handle them usually without having any issues.
So the long and the short of it is, you were right. Bees can be nice. See?
Yep.
Before we go any further, we forgot to do our barkeeping. Where are they going to go to get this recipe?
They're
Even though you wish you would have done a sour now.
I know. You could add egg whites. No, I'm just kidding. So you're going to go to designateddrinker.show for our tips and tricks and recipes and how to get to Jim, or
Well, you definitely want to read. You can read his article, which he mentioned earlier. It's "Don't worry, birds won't become dependent on you feeding them," says study.
I love that.
You like that delivery? No, or you could sign up for his classes. Why not?
And they're online.
What's that? No, his article is.
I know the classes. You don't have an online class, do you?
Well, through COVID, everything was online, but I don't teach. I teach at OSU, and when we are going back to classes this year, we're doing everything in person. So in theory, we won't be online, but we don't really know in the coming weeks what's going to happen.
No, you don't get to hire Jim to help you with your chickens, Gina.
I mean, if you want to come
if you
to
have
the
chicken
East Coast,
questions,
I apparently am obsessed with them.
I'll try and answer your chicken questions, Gina. Just let me know what they are.
And then in turn, he can ask you all the cocktail questions. See, it's win-win, barter system.
Yeah, exactly.
There we go.
I'll send you some eggs.
All right, I'm ready. You ready?
All right, this is
That's it. All right, so Jim, this is how we know if you ever listened to our show or not, because we have a last question for you. So in this day and age, everyone identifies themselves with a spirited animal, and you might identify yourself with the Great American Finch because it is the only bird I apparently know. and you can adapt to any situation, and you can be a city dweller or live in the woods, and that's what I love about the finches, right? If you could be one ingredient, whether it be for cocktails or for food, what would it be and why?
One ingredient for a food or cocktail and why? Man, that's a tough one. Maybe I'd be an egg.
He wants to be an egg.
Why?
Yeah, you could, because you could transform it to so many different things. You could be a whole egg, like you said, with the quail. You could be put into a different setting, like I'm thinking of a eggnog drink where you're kind of whipped up, or you could be an egg white for something like a whiskey sour. So there's a lot of, you never know where you're going to go if you're an egg, and someone's putting you into a cocktail, or even if they're baking or cooking with you as well. There's so many different routes you could go. So maybe I'll go with an egg.
I like it.
It's awesome.
Necessary ingredient.
I would say it's
and holds
necessary
everything
for life.
together.
Yeah,
I'm into that.
Yeah, there you go.
Jim, thank you for being here today. It was really nice.
I know. You got all your bird questions answered.
I know. I think I'm going to come with a dozen more, but that's why we can always have another episode,
You
right?
had to hold back. All right. Cheers to you, Jim. Cheers,
Thanks
Gina.
so much. This was fun. Cheers.
Cheers. Oh, we should say cheers, keep flying.
Oh, there you go.
Oh, that's good. Cheers.
The Designated Drinker Show is produced by Missing Link, a podcast media company that is dedicated to connecting people to intelligent, engaging, and informative content. Also in the Missing Link lineup of podcasts is Rodger That, a podcast dedicated to guiding you through the haze of dementia, led by skilled caregivers Bobbi and Mike Carducci. Now, if you're looking for a whole new way to enjoy the theater, check out Between Acts, an immersive audio theater podcast experience. Each episode takes you on a spellbinding journey through the works of newfound playwrights, from dramas to comedies and everything in between. Find Missing Link's League of Podcasts on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you find your podcasts. Please don't forget to subscribe, download, and review the shows. Your review helps our shows reach new audiences. To find out more about Missing Link, visit missinglink.company. That's missinglink.company.